Welcome to Byline Wyophile, a podcast that goes beyond the headlines of Wyoming's most important news stories. I'm your host, Claire Schnatterbeck. On today's episode, we'll be joined by reporter Angus Thuermer to talk about drought and diversions in the Colorado River Basin. Okay, well, welcome, Angus. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for your invitation, Claire.
I know water allocation in the Colorado River Basin is a very complicated issue affecting 40 million users. Can you first explain the difference between the upper and lower basins and what Wyoming's role and obligations are?
Sure. Let me describe the basin first. Everybody in Wyoming is familiar with Square Top and the Green River that runs below that iconic mountain in the Wind River Range. Well, the Colorado River Basin stretches from the Big Bend of the Green River, which is way up there by Square Top, some 1,400 miles to the Sea of Cortez, which is between the Baja Peninsula and the mainland of Mexico. So it's 246,000 square miles, the basin is. It takes up about 8% of the area of the lower 48. It's part of that is mountains where snowfall is abundant and produces runoff. And that runoff is particularly valuable because in the basin, basically what's not mountain is desert or semi-arid country. And there are 7 states in the basin, plus Mexico. And the division between the upper basin or upper division states and the lower basin or lower division states is a spot on the Colorado River known as Lee Ferry. It's just downstream from the Glen Canyon Dam that impounds Lake Powell. And it's the site of a water gauge and measuring station. In any case, the upper basin or upper division states are Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And they're upstream of Lee Ferry. And below that point is Arizona, California, and Nevada, and of course, Mexico. And the obligations and responsibilities, so to get to the second part of the question, the 7 states ratified and agreed to the Colorado River Compact way back in 1922. And this is known as the Law of the River. And it basically says the upper division or upper basin states will not diminish the flows past Lee Ferry beyond half the amount that the river produces. So basically, the Law of the River gives the lower basin states half and the upper basin states what's left over. And the water is accounted for by a measurement called acre feet. So a typical household uses about half an acre foot a year. So under the Colorado River Compact, the organizers figured there was some 15 million acre feet the river produced every year, and it was going to be equally divided among upper and lower basin states. That was calculated from a period of relative abundance. The obligation for the upper basin states is on a 10-year average, they cannot diminish the flows past Lee Ferry beyond half of the 15 million acre feet a year. So in a 10-year average, the upper basin states have to deliver 75 million acre feet past Lee Ferry. And there's only one problem, and I'll quote a law professor in Colorado named Mark Scolacci, who says, quote, "There isn't 7.5 million acre feet available to the upper states." Wyoming's share of the upper basin responsibilities and dividends amounts to 14%. But that's both what it owes in terms of what needs to be delivered downstream and what it can take from the leftover that the upper basin states get from what is not delivered below Lee Ferry.
So, as you reported, Lake Powell recently dropped to its lowest ever level, which prompted a water release from Flaming Gorge. What factors contributed to that low point, and how are water managers reacting?
Less than expected flows from less precipitation, less snow in the mountains contributed to less runoff, climate change, drought, of course, downstream and upstream use by households, by industry, by irrigators, by industrial plants, and evaporation. All of those things combined to diminish, to lower the level at Lake Powell. Users include everything from the community, the city of Las Vegas, city of Phoenix, golf courses there, lawns, drinking water in Southern California through the Colorado River Aqueduct, a 240-mile long aqueduct, crop irrigation in the Imperial Valley of California. It's a famous agricultural area. Irrigation in Wyoming, irrigation in Colorado. All of those things diminish the level at Lake Powell. And I think you also asked what managers are doing about it. If you want to start close to home, there was an experiment in Wyoming called demand management, where cities put up a bunch of money and paid Wyoming ranchers and paid them not to divert creeks in the Upper Green River Basin after their first cutting of hay. And that water that they did not divert presumably would flow downstream to Lake Powell. There was one problem. Nobody was really sure that the next irrigator downstream didn't take the water away. So this brings up the issue of shepherding any conserved water all the way to Lake Powell to make sure that Wyoming gets credit for it and it is actually usable. And in the immediate period, the Bureau of Reclamation is making they sort of call it a small E emergency release from Flaming Gorge Dam to keep the level of Lake Powell high enough so it can operate properly. And the release from Flaming Gorge is going to be about 125,000 acre feet through October. There are other longer term strategies that various agencies and states are working on to try to keep the level of Lake Powell at an elevation where it can continue to function as it was designed.
So, what's at stake if Lake Powell continues to drop and cannot function?
The first thing that the operators of the Glen Canyon Dam are worried about is electrical generation. There needs to be a certain amount of water above the intake to the massive generators there to keep them spinning. When the water drops below a certain level, debris can become sucked in to the intakes. Air bubbles can go in and cause some vibrations that can shake things apart. The power generation produces about $120 million a year. It's valuable to the Bureau of Reclamation, and the power is valuable to the entire Southwest. That's the first thing that is operators are worried about. And if the lake begins to drop too low, states downstream who entitled to their certain amount of water may make a call, what's known as a call. And it's basically summoning the water police to go upstream and find out whether the folks upstream in the upper basin states are allowing enough water to flow past Lee Ferry as outlined and agreed to in the compact. And so my term, water police, the monitors, the engineers will basically come up to the state and say, okay, Wyoming, upper basin states, you're not delivering enough water, or you're diminishing the flow at Lee Ferry. You can't do that. So we are going to find the person who has the most recent water right, and we're going to tell that person that he or she can't use the water that he or she had a legal right to use because of the conditions downstream. And so they will shut off that head gate first. And then if that doesn't resolve the issue, they would move on to the next most recent water right and shut off that head gate or user, and so on down the line.
And what did you find regarding Wyoming's plans to divert and develop water amid this situation downstream and potential water police?
Well, the Colorado River Compact and associated laws say that Wyoming has water to develop. It is not using its entire share, that 14% annually. And its average annual usage is more than half of its annual share, but it's, a little bit more than half. It's not the whole thing. So as far as Wyoming is concerned, it has water that it can develop, meaning it could build reservoirs and hold water for a beneficial use. There are a bunch of projects that Wyoming has underway that would accomplish that would store more water upstream in the upper basin, in the Green River Basin and the Little Snake River Basin. We're currently having difficulties meeting the appropriate level at Lake Powell. And Wyoming has about $123 million in projects. That's just an estimate. And it's, as far as it's concerned, it's basically full steam ahead. Wyoming is proud of its position. It's not a shrinking violet when it comes to water development. And it's continuing with its projects, and it believes that it has the authority to decide its own fate and do what it wants with its share of the water. What some of the projects are that Wyoming is eyeing to build in the basin. I'll start at the top of the drainage. There are plans for a new dam at New Fork Lake that would release an additional 9,400 acre feet annually. The Wyoming Water Development Office has rejected a conservation alternative there. Conservation apparently is not part of the Water Development Office vocabulary. This project, New Fork Lake, would require a big dredging and construction effort at the narrows between two parts of the lake. The Big Sandy Dam is scheduled to be raised, and that'll hold back another 12,900 acre feet. The state is reconstructing the Middle Piney Dam near LaBarge to impound another 3,370 acre feet. They're rebuilding that on an old landslide, but the water there is very valuable because it carries rights that are pre-compact. So that 3,300 acre feet that would be stored behind the new Middle Piney Dam wouldn't be subject to a call. Those are in Sublette County. And then at Fontenelle Reservoir, mostly Lincoln County, the operators, the Bureau of Reclamation is looking at possibly providing access to 80,000 acre feet there that has not traditionally been used or leased. That could meet some compact obligations. And then the big project is above the Little Snake River in Carbon County. Irrigators want to build a 280-foot high concrete dam to impound 10,000 acre feet. This is called the West Fork Battle Creek. It would serve only 67 to 100 irrigators. It would not irrigate that much new acreage. There's been some criticism of this idea, but that hasn't stopped irrigators and water development officials from pushing ahead. And now the State Board of Land Commissioners has joined the effort by backing a proposed study of a proposed 24,000 acre land swap that would give Wyoming ownership of the dam site on the Medicine Bow National Forest, right next to a wilderness area. Wyoming ownership of that dam site would make approval of the dam easier than it would be if the Forest Service still owned the property. Dam proponents have said that they likely couldn't build a reservoir there if the property remained under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Forest Service, and the dam had to be authorized under a special use permit. And these 5 water storage projects would impound and possibly use or divert 115,000 new acre feet, basically a year. And that's almost the amount of the emergency release from Flaming Gorge. It's more than a drop in the bucket. It's a significant amount. One of the things that someone pointed out in comments recently was that dams do not create new water, but they do hold it back, and they allow managers discretion in some instances about when the water is released.
So, is there anything that could stop the state from development in light of drought and other factors?
Wyoming doesn't believe so, but others are questioning some of these projects. One group has called for a moratorium. This is the Great Basin Water Network, and it's a group that's been around for some time in the Southwest. It wants some breathing room so that everybody can examine the entire system from head to toe and decide what projects are appropriate and what are not. Wyoming has to find money for these projects. That may be one difficulty that water developers are facing. They're at the same time that Wyoming is trying to build these structures to impound and possibly divert more water in the Colorado River Basin, the state is facing problems at other impoundments, specifically the La Prelle Dam above Douglas. The reservoir behind the La Prelle Dam can't be filled because the dam is suspect. It's an aging structure. It's a crummy design. There was just an earthquake in the area. And the whole thing is going to have to be torn down and rebuilt. And nobody has put that in perspective next to these new development projects. So lack of funds is one consideration, but the state believes that other interests in the Colorado River Basin that might not want Wyoming to build water storage projects in the Colorado River Basin, other interests have little say about what Wyoming can do with its own water.
So, you touched on how finances contribute to development. How could a new federal infrastructure bill and other post pandemic aid play into this issue?
Well, that's uncertain. And many of those projects are funded through negotiations in Washington that the public is generally not part of. So some people are wary of horse trading that might go on in the back rooms. But I don't know that water impoundment in the Colorado River Basin has risen to the top of the list on any of these relief packages.
Seems like there's a lot of interesting development on this issue.
Well, thanks for your interest in the Colorado River Basin and the Green River and the Little Snake River. It is complicated and fascinating. We will see what the future holds. It's going to be quite interesting to follow the developments as this situation progresses.
Thanks, Angus, and thanks for listening to Byline Wyophile. Visit wyophile.com to read stories on the Colorado River drought and other vital Wyoming news.